Hey, Red here. Today we're talking about the homicidal hero, Faust. Who doesn't like a bloody vigilante story, right? I mean, who wouldn't want a psychotic vigilante with an affinity for slashing running around the city, right? Well, that's Faust for you. Now let's get the answer to one simple question. Is it metal?
Quiet Red Media. Shh.
A 15-issue series, 25 years in the making. Faust is a maniacal badass, and if you've never heard of him, well, I'ma fix that. It's actually kind of a shame, because I feel like a lot of people don't know about Faust. In fact, just finding info for this video was a task in itself. Thing is, I feel like it's perfect for those fans of horror and gore type stuff, e.g. fans of chaos comics, for which David Quinn actually wrote. I think it deserves its due. First though, let's talk about where he came from. The creators of Faust, Tim Vigil and David Quinn, have both had extensive careers in comics, both also focusing heavily on horror and supernatural titles. Artist Tim Vigil actually got his break in proper comic books on a comic published by the short-lived Silver Wolf Comics called Grips in 1986. Another comic about a violent psychopath with blades coming out of his wrist. Who's into that kind of thing? I mean, come on. How is that cool, huh? Snicked! This title would display Vigil's hallmark hyper-violent style and act as his sort of launching point. Tim and his brother Joe would get their fascination with this violent style in part from watching the movie The Wild Bunch as used, as well as various violent, lesser-known comic offerings of the time. After working at Silver Wolf for a time and doing some shit there, Vigil moved on to start up a publishing house called Comic Express, and this led him to meeting his future co-creator, David Quinn. David Quinn was another creative talent inspired by the obscure horror offerings of his youth, discovering the works of Richard Corbin and the controversial underground comics of the time when he was around 13 years old. The underground comics movement was sort of a counterculture scene prominent in the 60s and 70s of explicit comics that skirted by the Comics Code Authority, usually depicting much more mature art and writing. Some even delving into illegal depictions of copyrighted characters from the mainstream. Mostly porn. Get your Captain America porn. That's America's ass, alright. It was punk as fuck. Quinn, an admittedly cocky musician with a background as a playwright, came into the picture around 87 while Vigil was beginning work on Omega. Being a patron of a comic shop run by the publisher, he was shown Vigil's artwork for Omega and pointed out the less than stellar writing in the works. So Vigil and Quinn were then introduced, began working on Omega together. Omega, later changed to Omen due to the ever-litigious Marvel, wasn't necessarily a hit, and the publisher decided to go in another direction. However, they liked the combo of Vigil and Quinn, so the two began another project that they co-created together, Faust. They decided to do something that may appeal more to the fans of Vigil's prior work, Grips. Something violent, graphic, full of fear and contemporary commentary, but still wholly different from Grips. Quinn and Vigil crafted an urban fare laden with touches of devilish themes, using New York as the stand-in for hell itself. Quinn stating that he was exploring ways to use words and pictures to feel something directly. The two concocted a graphic story from there. Faust, Love of the Damned, though the beginnings of Faust were a little confusing since the pair left their original publisher before it was actually published. Faust finally came out in 1988, published by North Star. So what is Faust? It's basically like a fever dream Wolverine mixed with the Crow and Spawn. Let me explain. Actually, since it's only 15 issues, let me give you a rundown of the series. So Spoilers ahead. Faust is a Faustian tale about a madman named John Jaspers. Jaspers is a troubled individual, to say the least. The story begins with Jaspers already doing his violent thing as Faust. His former doctor and lover, Jade DeCamp, is starting to put together that this serial murdering vigilante is indeed Jaspers, who she thought dead. She witnesses Faust's handiwork after he takes out some street trash, a habit of his that's beginning to piss off the crime boss named M, who's the leader of a criminal organization called The Hand. M requests the song Are You Lonesome Tonight by Elvis Presley to be played over and over on the radio and dedicated to the new kid in town, aka Faust, in an attempt to play mind games with him. We start to see just how troubled John is when he meets with Jade in public sans costume. His memory is spotty at best, and he's traumatized by the ones he does have, seeing demons and delusions at every turn. Some of them, however, are not paranoia, as the police, as well as M and his thugs, are after he and Jade, and John has a ravenous urge to protect her. His dispatching of the thugs makes M's cohorts a bit nervous, as Faust is disrupting their business. They implore M to unleash his secret assassin project to deal with Faust, but as it turns out, Faust is the assassin project. During this little meeting, we get to see a bit of M's true demonic nature, as he unleashes a bit of hell on a subordinate. We see that not only are his criminal associates becoming uneasy, but the crooked cops he's working with are as well. John ends up getting popped by the cops after slaughtering a bunch of thugs in a warehouse. He's arrested and brought to a psych ward, where, while unconscious and under watch, he uncovers his memories of how he became the vicious slasher he is, and M's hand in it. John manages to wake up and escape, breaking out Jade and losing his shit on a multitude of cops and crooks, eventually making his way to M himself. M is intent on raising a creature he calls the homunculus, and he needs John's power to complete it. Or something. I don't know, it's all a bit wonky and I kinda got lost. Sorry. A lot of weird satanic murder orgy cult stuff goes on. Meanwhile, M's board of criminal constituents are not happy with the way their arrangement is playing out, accusing him of not living up to his end of the deal. So, M unleashes the homunculus on them, and, well, that's the end of them. During all this, there's a newspaper guy and a detective doing stuff. But to be honest, I didn't really pay a lot of attention to them. They're there, and they see this raging beast slaughtering henchmen outside the mansion. The two make their way inside to help John, but John kills the detective. We then move to M's very violent and promiscuous wife, Claire, who feels spurned by Jade's inclusion in his grandiose designs. Wait, did I mention that he's trying to unleash hell on Earth? Because he's doing that. So there's that. Anyway, it looks like old M's gonna have to deal with a particularly cruel and psychotic woman scorned. There's some going back and forth between M's weird sex cult shit and Jade and the homunculus and the newspaper man trying to convince John to stop M. John runs into Claire and they, bone. Yeah, no, for the betterment of humanity, you know. Claire claims that her sex magic can stop M. There's a weird bit of jibber jabber while M and John mentally jab at each other as they bang one another's woman. It's a whole thing. Did I mention this is an adult comic? To be honest, I started losing interest at this point in the series. It goes on for a bit with the sex and the blah blah blah, a lot of wordy panels. Anyway, I'm gonna skip ahead a bit. Though Tim Vigil is not dropping the ball on the art at all. At some point, John has a battle with the homunculus, and while that's going down, M, transformed into some weird plant creature looking like Swamp Thing on My 600 Pound Life, births Jade from inside himself. And it's all just as odd as that sounds. M transforms into a more classic devil-looking form and babbles on while the homunculus and John battle it out. During the chaos, Claire swoops in and attempts to take Jade while she's still loopy from her birthing, but the homunculus puts a stop to that. John gets a second win from some magical fruit after taking a beating from the homunculus. This fruit gives him a more demonic look, having sprouted horns and barbs. M is getting closer to bringing about his hellish reality as round 2 between John and the homunculus takes place, and Claire and the newspaper man come into the fray. Everyone is yelling and fighting and cursing and nude. It's a mess. M absorbs the homunculus and increases his own power, transforming yet again. And finally, John stabs Jade, interrupting the ritual and giving John the upper hand. So John rips into M, gutting him with his claws and putting an end to his macabre designs. John dies with M, and the hellish ritual is finally stopped, the only survivors being Jade and the newspaper man. So, what became of this wild ride of a comic series? Well, Faust had a spotty publication schedule, to say the least, but it did finally wrap up. The series was finally finished in 2012, about 25 years after the first issue. It's not exactly a reliable title to follow, but at the same time, you gotta admire the fact that they kept at it. To keep it going and finish the story you wanted to tell, even if it takes nearly 3 decades, well, that's some shit. The title also shifted publishers a bit. The first 6 issues were released by North Star Publications. After that, Vigil and Quinn's own studio, Rebel Studios, released issues 7 through 15, and then they also reprinted the first 6 with alternate covers. In 2000, a movie based on the comic was released. It was directed by Brian Usna, who had produced movies like Reanimator, From Beyond, The Guyver. Cool shit if you ask me. The screenplay was actually co-written by David Quinn himself. However, the film didn't really do all that well. It has, however, become one of those cult classic types. Given the absurdity of the source material, it's not a surprise, really. Faust has also spawned several spin-off series, such as Book of M, 777 The Wrath, Singa's Talons, and Claire's Lust. It's also been collected as Faust Communion. Nowadays, Faust has solidified its place as a proper cult indie classic of the outlaw genre. I reckon a lot of people still don't know about Faust or the influence it probably had, but those who do seem to consider it a pretty noteworthy title. And it's still got pull, even in the mainstream. Case in point, in 2021 it was announced that Faust had been optioned for an animated series by Sony. So Faust is still alive and well. Quinn and Vigil are set to consult on the project, but I don't know, I can't help but wonder how Sony will adapt such a deviant property. But here's hoping. Now that we've got a little rundown of Faust, we can make an informed decision. Personally, I think Outlaw Comics are inherently metal, but that's just me. In my opinion, this property is dripping with ferrous material, but let's understand why. Let us answer the question we all came for. Is it metal? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that it's fucking metal. But, how metal? Well, luckily for you, I've devised a simple set of criteria we're going to use to determine that for sure. This criteria is based on what I felt will make a property, well, metal. It's as follows. I'll give each 3 possible points. So I'm going to go through each metric and see where it falls on the scale that is metal. I think tragic is a fitting word for old Johnny. I mentioned that Jade was John's doctor, but I didn't specify. You see, she was his shrink while he was locked in a mental institution. Not the most happy of introductions. It speaks to the absurdity of Faust that Jade would have ever fallen for a clearly batshit crazy individual like John. But that fucked up relationship and its corruption of Jade is also part of the tragedy. So if that's not a backstory rife with a little bit of tragedy, I don't know what the hell is. Come on now. Is it even a question? So as just one example, he spends several pages in issue 4, butt naked, just slaughtering dudes left and right. It's, nuts. Boom! See what I did there? You're funny, dude. Seriously, I think Tim Vigil has drawn more peckers than anyone in comics. Oh, and there's this one part where M eats another dude's face off. Yeah, it's pretty gnarly. Faust is brutal as fuck. Seriously violent shit. It's kind of the whole lure of Faust and comics like it. They were meant to be outrageous, to buck the comics code authority. I mean, hell, these guys could have conceivably been prosecuted for how brutal the shit was. Full points. Yes, sirree. Occult themes were a foundational part of Faust. The setting of New York was always meant to be a stand-in for hell itself, and the themes of corruption, damnation, sin, and hellish consequence are baked right in. But aside from that, there's just a lot of weird occult shit going on in Faust. Hell, just look at the covers for this book. I mean, it's called Faust for a reason. I'll go with a full 3 on this one. Duh. Faust is incredibly aggressive. Brutality aside, John Jaspers is always looking to hurt somebody. He's hyper-aggressive, and the story follows suit. The intensity can come from more than just old Johnny, though. The way Quinn layers in song lyrics and more poetic writings kind of lends itself to the dark and violent world in a pretty unique way. The other characters throughout definitely add to the overall intensity, whether it's the shouting thugs and crooked cops or the brooding calm intensity of M. It's got this in spades. It's an intense title, there's no doubt. It's going to be full points on this one. Yeah. There's a plethora of monstrous entities depicted in Faust. Zombies, demons, winged beasts, werewolves, devils, gorgons, homunculi, and creatures of all sorts are peppered throughout this series. This one's gotta be a full 3 points. There's no shortage of monsters in the pages of Faust. You can see for yourself. It's yeah boy. The dude has a devil costume with a pointy cape, an evil grin, and gnarly talons. I'd say anything modeled after a demon or devil is pretty fucking metal. Faust himself totally has a metal design, but even the rest of the world they've built is pretty metal. The visuals evoke punk and metal at every turn. 3 points. It's called Faust. Of course. I mean, shit, Mephistopheles himself is one of the characters, and hell on earth is his goal, so yeah. And he gets more and more devilish with a capital D as the series goes on. I can't give it less than 3 on this one. He's one of the damn characters, right, Gary? Shut up, Gary. And that's a total of 21 points. That puts Faust right about here. Oh yeah, metal AF. I knew it'd be nothing less, cause this shit is batshit mad. Faust is one of the most metal properties I can think of. If I were to compare it to a metal genre, I'd say Faust is like gore grind. So there's your answer. It's metal. Yeah.
Let me be clear, this is the best thing I've ever said, hands down, bar none. If you disagree, then you're a big dumb stupid head and you smell like a frog farted in a dead turtle's mouth.